Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a case that perfectly captures what happens when big, sweeping constitutional ideas literally collide with the everyday reality of our local streets. We're looking at a fascinating, high-stakes tug-of-war over who really holds the power in our communities. It's the Land Transportation Office versus the City of Butuan. Let's get right into it.
I want you to think for a second about the tricycles you probably see every single day on your commute. Who do you think is actually controlling them? Like, is it the massive machinery of the national government sitting all the way in the Capitol, or is it your local mayor and city council calling the shots? Just imagine the absolute chaos if the wrong agency suddenly started handing out licenses and making up the rules. When laws change to give local governments more power, where exactly does that power stop? Well, that is exactly the puzzle we're going to solve today through this landmark Supreme Court dispute.
Here's our roadmap for the explainer. 1. The local autonomy clash. 2. Butuan's power play. 3. Franchising versus registration. 4. The Supreme Court ruling. And finally, 5. Why national standards matter.
Starting off with Section 1, the local autonomy clash, a constitutional mandate.
So our story actually begins with the 1987 Constitution. It explicitly states that local subdivisions should enjoy genuine autonomy. Now, when you pair this constitutional mandate with Republic Act No. 7160, which most of us know better as the Local Government Code of 1991, things get really interesting. You see, the entire goal here was decentralization. The state wanted its territorial and political subdivisions to be self-reliant partners rather than just waiting around to take orders from the national government. When you realize the sheer massive scale of this legislative shift, it makes total sense why a place like the city of Butuan suddenly felt incredibly empowered to take matters into their own hands.
Which brings us to Section 2, Butuan's power play, testing the limits of devolution.
Feeling this powerful wind of local autonomy in their sails, the City Council of Butuan passed SB Ordinance No. 916-92. And honestly, what's wild here is that they didn't just dip their toes in the water. They weren't just asking for a little more jurisdiction, They outright claimed total control. They asserted the authority to regulate the operation of tricycles for hire, grant the franchises, actually register the vehicles themselves, and even issue the permits and licenses for the drivers. It was an incredibly audacious move that naturally sparked a massive and immediate jurisdictional clash with the national government.
And this right here is where the tension boils over into a full-on tug-of-war. On one side, you have the city of Butuan pointing directly to the local government code. They argued, and quite fiercely, that the code explicitly allowed them to create their own sources of revenue, arguing that this included collecting registration fees and licensing for tricycles. But on the other side, the Land Transportation Office, the LTO, firmly pushed back. They drew a hard line, arguing that sure, while the authority to franchise tricycles was indeed transferred to local units, the power to register vehicles and issue driver's licenses remained strictly under their national jurisdiction under Republic Act No. 4136.
Let's move to Section 3, Franchising versus Registration, the legal tiebreaker.
To solve this huge puzzle, we really have to look at what a franchise actually means in the eyes of the law. Basically, it's a special privilege granted by the government to do something that isn't just a common right of every citizen. In the context of tricycles, a franchise is all about regulating a business privilege. It's about looking at a city map, deciding the economically viable routes, setting up the specific zones where tricycles can operate for hire, and actively managing the local public transport layout so it best serves the community.
Now, registration and licensing, those are entirely different beasts. To register literally means to formally record a vehicle into a central system. And a driver's license is a specific certificate authorizing a person's baseline competence to safely operate a motor vehicle on a public highway. Do you notice the shift in focus here? It has absolutely nothing to do with running a business and everything to do with public safety and centralized national record keeping. It is fundamentally about keeping dangerous drivers and unsafe vehicles off the streets.
So, here is the absolutely crucial split. Before the local government code, the LTFRB handled franchising, and the LTO handled registration. When powers devolved to help local governments manage their own transit ecosystems and try to curb highway accidents, only the LTFRB's franchising power was transferred to the local government units. The LTO's power to register vehicles and test drivers, well, that stayed exactly where it was, with the LTO.
All right, Section 4, the Supreme Court ruling, drawing the line.
Now, you might think the difference between franchising and registering is super obvious to us now, but initially, the Regional Trial Court and the Court of Appeals actually sided with Butuan.
No joke, they even issued an injunction against the LTO. But then, the Supreme Court stepped in. They reviewed the case and completely reversed the decisions of those lower courts. The Supreme Court lifted the permanent injunction against the LTO and permanently returned the absolute power of vehicle registration and driver licensing to the national agency.
And they grounded their decision in this really powerful Latin phrase, imperium in imperium, an empire within an empire. The Supreme Court explained that while the Constitution absolutely seeks to strengthen local government units and ensure their viability, it was never ever the intention of the law to install an infra-sovereign political subdivision independent of the single sovereign state. You simply cannot have a mini-state making up its own driving laws within the broader republic. It completely undermines the very fabric of national unity.
And that brings us to Section 5, Why National Standards Matter, the Real-World Impact.
Okay, so we've covered the legal theory, but why does this actually matter to you and me out there on the streets? Well, during the case, the Solicitor General laid out a very real parade of horribles that would have happened if Butuan had won. Without centralized LTO registration, think about it. A tricycle stolen in one municipality could easily be re-registered in another local government unit with absolutely zero oversight. Fake driver's licenses would totally boom because a driver who failed a rigorous LTO test could just travel down the road to a much more lenient municipality to grab their license. Plus, devolution would force these local units to hire their own inspectors and testers. Those are astronomical costs that local revenues simply wouldn't cover. This would inevitably lead to massive and frankly fatal safety compromises on our roads.
Ultimately, the court reminded us of a really fundamental hierarchy in law: police power versus taxation. The LTO's authority to register vehicles and license drivers is an exercise of the state's police power. It exists purely to ensure public safety, roadworthiness, and the core competence of drivers. Butuan's claim, on the other hand, was based almost entirely on the power of taxation, the power to raise revenue. The Supreme Court made it crystal clear, and this is the crucial takeaway for us today. You cannot imply the repeal of a vital national safety standard just to serve a local government's power to tax and collect fees. Safety and national standards absolutely must always come first.
Which brings us to the end of our analysis. It leaves us with this critical, ongoing balancing act. How do we continue to champion local independence and empower our communities without compromising the safety and standardization of our shared national systems? It's a massive tension that truly defines modern governance, and definitely something to think about the next time you hop in a tricycle.